Hi everyone, my name is Sophia McSmith and I am a sophomore history student. I'm creating this project as the final for my Historian's Craft class, and without further ado, a brief overview of the Watergate scandal. I went ahead and broke this video down into 4 chapters. So we have the cast of characters, the powder keg, the break-in, and the trial. Chapter 1, the cast of characters. There's a lot of people involved in this scandal, and I wanted to make sure that going forward with the story, you'd be able to keep everyone straight. First, we have Egil Krogh. He was a lawyer, an FBI liaison, and he led the Special Investigation Unit for the Nixon administration. G. Gordon Liddy, a lawyer, an FBI agent, and the organizer of the Watergate break-in. James W. McCord Jr. is a CIA spy. He was an electronics expert and was the head of security for Nixon's re-election campaign. John Ehrlichman was the White House counsel, the assistant to the president for domestic affairs, and the creator of the plumbers. More on them later. John Dean was an attorney and also White House counsel. Larry Higby was the assistant to the White House Chief of Staff, H.R. Haldeman. And H.R. Haldeman was a political aide and the White House Chief of Staff. Richard Nixon is the 37th President of the United States of America, and he was also the 36th Vice President. Prior to both of those occupations, he was a congressman for the state of California, and he's a member of the Republican Party. Daniel Ellsberg is an economist, a political activist, a U.S. military analyst, and he's also responsible for releasing the Pentagon Papers. More on those in the next chapter. Chapter 2, the powder keg. These are some of the events that really led up to the Watergate scandal, the break-in. First and foremost, we have the Pentagon Papers. So the Pentagon Papers were a history of U.S. involvement in the country of Vietnam from 1945 to 1968, and it was put together by the Department of Defense. These papers actually revealed that the ultimate goal of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War was containment of China, not having the best interests of the Vietnamese people in mind, as the administration at the time had tried to tell the American people. It revealed lies that the Johnson administration had told to the general public, and Daniel Ellsberg leaked the papers, and the first excerpts of these papers were published in the New York Times on June 13th, 1971. Next, we have the Gemstone operations, a series of illegal operations laid out by G. Gordon Liddy, intended to weaken the Democratic Party in order to secure Nixon's re-election. These operations included kidnapping, espionage, wiretapping. Chapter 3, the break-in. So before we even got to the break-in at the Watergate office building itself, there was actually a break-in at Dr. Fielding's office. So the plumbers, the group that I mentioned before, were 5 men who had been tasked with carrying out the objectives of the Nixon administration, right? These were the guys who were actually getting their hands dirty, not just sitting behind a desk and making the plans. So the plumbers, with the approval of Ehrlichman, broke into the office of Dr. Fielding, Ellsberg's psychiatrist. The goal was to gain access to Ellsberg's file and use any embarrassing or negative information present to discredit him, but no information of the sort was found. June 17th, 1972. In the early hours of the morning, the plumbers broke into the headquarters of the Democratic National Convention, which at the time was located in the Watergate office building. They planted listening devices meant to uncover any plans of sabotage that the DNC may have had for the Republican Party, but in the midst of this break-in, they were discovered by a security guard and were arrested by officers with the Metropolitan Police. Chapter 4. The trial. The outcomes of the trial. Krogh pled guilty to federal charges of conspiracy for his involvement in the break-in to Dr. Fielding's office. He ultimately served 4.5 months of a 6-year sentence. Liddy was sentenced to 20 years for illegal wiretapping, conspiracy, and burglary. His sentence was later commuted to 8 years, of which he served 4.5. McCord was sentenced to 1 to 5 years in prison for his part in the burglary, but served only 4 months. Ehrlichman and Haldeman were both sentenced to 8 years for perjury, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Their sentences were commuted to 4.5 years. Both served 18 months. Because of his cooperation with the investigation, he was sentenced to time served, ultimately 4 months. Nixon resigned the presidency in order to avoid certain impeachment on August 9, 1974. He is the only president to ever do so. Thank you for watching. Again, this was a super brief overview. I would love to do a more in-depth video on this topic. If you have any information that you want me to add, by all means comment down below. I would love to include it in the next video. A huge shout out to the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum located in Yorba Linda, California. They had so many primary sources readily available, lots of documents that were scanned that I was able to access online. All of my primary sources will be linked in the description box below, as well as my 2 secondary sources, which were wonderful books that I highly recommend reading. Thank you so much.